Yeah, my opening thing didn't start when I started recording. Yeah, let's here it is. All right, you know what? That was a fitting opening to this video because I think this is going to be a weird one. Today we're going to talk about solo role playing, maybe role playing in general, and depression and breakups, heartbreak. This is something that has been tumbling around the dryer of my mind for a while. I've never quite been able to settle on how I want to approach it or even what I have to say about it. But suddenly tonight, I was like, you know what? I still don't know, but let's let the camera and the good times roll and see what happens. So let me say a couple of things right off the bat. Number one, I am not giving any clinical advice. I'm not speaking in the role of a clinician or an expert or a scientist. I'm talking about stuff that I know as far as I've read it, and also mostly stuff that I'm basing off my experiences or the experiences of people who are close to me. And so please do not misinterpret this as any sort of professional advice. I think all of you know that, but if you need that sort of help, go ahead and reach out to your physician, your psychiatrist, your nurse practitioner, your osteopathic doctor, your Reiki specialist, your insurance billing agent, whoever it is, not me. The second thing is that this may not apply to everybody. You might not be interested in this. It is an admittedly weird sort of video. I know that not everybody has experienced a sort of devastating breakup. Not everyone deals with depression. Not everyone who deals with depression want to hear stuff about this. And that leads into the third thing is please understand that I am not trying to sell anyone on like solo RPGs as a solution to depression. I don't even know if that would work. I'm just sort of reflecting on these things in the context of role playing and solo role playing and some thoughts that I've had. I feel compelled to pay it forward. I had a really, really bad breakup when I was a young man, about it's like 18 years ago now, my goodness. I had a really, really tough breakup, and when that happened, there was no YouTube. And so I remember I went to a site that I don't think exists anymore, and it was called like So You've Been Dumped, and I would just read this forum. This was like pre-Reddit or anything. And when I finally came out of that fog, I felt such tremendous gratitude for all of the wisdom and understanding and support given by total strangers. And I've always felt compelled to pay that forward because I think that having a breakup, especially as a young person that's not like a marital divorce, I feel like that's a form of what might be called disenfranchised grief, where you feel profound grief. Sometimes for me, it was the worst grief I ever experienced. As embarrassing as that was to say at the time, because I'd like lost grandparents and stuff before that, but it was by far the most devastating thing that ever happened to me. And I was, like 18 years old. And I think that, I remember telling some people about it and their response would be like, oh, young love, or like more fish in the sea. And I was like, wow, this is so cruel. And what I also found out, though, is it wasn't always cruel, because some people literally have no idea about a serious breakup. Some people will never experience a difficult breakup. Some people will never get dumped. They will do the breaking up. Some people will marry the first person they love. By the way, I was doing some miniature painting today, so I apologize if there's paint speckles. And also, I have 12 years here from Max Moon Games that has nothing to do with the topic today, other than maybe if you're like me, this is how long you mourn the loss of a relationship when you were young. I just thought I would page through some of this so that you have something to look at, because I'm mostly just going to be talking. 12 years, Max Moon Games. This is a dungeon crawl with a Hexploring tables, quick reference guide, campaign journal, and Demon Lord expansion. Max Moon rules check out the website again. That's Max Moon Games, and I will try to put that link in the notes. Okay. So, yeah, some people they marry their first love. Some people who are watching, you've never had a relationship. You haven't been able to find somebody who's right for you. Some of you are still in a period maybe where you're very afraid to date, or you don't feel too good about yourself yet. Maybe you feel like you're someone who hasn't had a lot of luck, and that is a different sort of tragedy that also does not get talked about. Is this feeling of like having a lot of love to give and nowhere to put it. And so I don't want to denigrate anybody's experiences or try to like say that anybody's situation is worse than others, just that this is something that I would like to talk about and see if there's anything maybe that is helpful to you. Who knows, okay? So I do not like when people oversell anything that is a hobby. There seems to be a problem in modern times where nothing can just be a hobby. Like everything has to be monetized. It has to have a body of research behind it. It has to have consultants that come in and start talking about it and making money. This is like everything's a grift, in this sort of like post-industrial setting. And I think it's important to say that, again, I'm not proffering this as the magic solution to any of it, because there is no magic solution to heartbreak, to loss, to sadness, because if there was, there wouldn't be so many different ideas out there and so many people suffering about it, a lot of people suffering in silence. And so I think that solo role-playing is fun, and I think that this and things like it could be helpful if you're dealing with some difficult times. The first thing I want to say, and this is a hard lesson that I learned in my life, is that you cannot think yourself out of depression. Okay? I know that everyone thinks that they are the exception to that. I know that, okay? And the reason you think that is because you're depressed. And the part of your mind that is depressed wants to believe that you can alleviate that depression by merely doing cognitive tasks, okay? Because it's much easier to do cognitive tasks than it is to go to the gym and do deadlifts until you feel better, right? It would be much easier if we can solve our deep ennui and existential crises by sitting in a recliner chair and eating pizza-flavored Pringles. Or pizzerias. Remember those chips? Those ruled. You cannot think yourself out of depression. And there's actually a reason for that. That's not just me patting you on the back and telling you some old wisdom from Man Alone. The reason you cannot think yourself out of it is because of metacognition. Okay, so you have your cognition, which is what you think, and then you have your metacognition, which you might think of as like your quality control. And your metacognition is your thinking about your thoughts. It's the kind of thoughts that you have that are like, is that the right way to think about this? Am I being fair right now? Am I being motivated by something other than rationality? Am I being emotional? Metacognition, we probably notice it in retrospect the most after we embarrass ourselves while drunk. Metacognition really works overtime there. Your metacognition might be like, whoa, am I the asshole? Does everyone in this room hate me? And then you're like, no, everyone in this room loves me, right? And then the next day you're like, yep, they all hated me. Because your metacognition was trying to assess your drunken cognition, but your metacognition was also drunk. And it's the same thing with depression, is that the quality control or self-repair functions of your brain that you're using to try and solve depression, those functions also have depression. So your ability to judge things, approximate things, look at things objectively, which the brain is already horrible at that. It's even worse because your reality and self-reporting is extremely skewed. It's extremely distorted. and your ability to make an appraisal of yourself is completely diminished when you're depressed. And you can't really see this when you're young, to see depression as this severe neurological process, because we have a lot of compensatory mechanisms. But if you've ever seen somebody who's an older adult, like 75, when they get depression, their body slows down, sometimes to the point that they can develop something called pseudodementia, where they become so depressed, their systems, their neurological system is so depressed or slowed that they become forgetful, they start wandering, they don't remember who people are, they don't recognize family members, etc. And so you can sort of see like the dramatic effects on a biological level of depression in older adults. And so all that stuff is happening to anybody who feels depressed. But when you're younger, you have, a bunch of, like I said, compensatory systems. And so if the thought is that you are trying to figure out how to feel better about yourself, and specifically, this was something that after I got broken up with the first time in my life, I was desperate to feel better. Whoo, did I feel terrible? And I just want to say, I really do think, first of all, I am so thankful for the lovely BB for just being my one and only. That I'm so thankful to have gone through all of these terrible things, because if that's if that is who is at the end of that road, I want to do that. I do that a million times again, right? But I am thinking about that level of depression that I had at that time, and I know I can see it, like I can see the behaviors and I can describe it, but I cannot feel it anymore. It's kind of like if you were to think of what an orange smells like. You can think of that right now. Just go ahead in your brain. I can think of what if that state of depression after a breakup was an orange, I can see what the orange looks like. I can feel its skin, but I don't remember what it smells like that actual visceral experience of it. And I think that is something that you should see as hopeful. Now, it was 18 years ago, but to be honest, and not enough people are honest about this thing, I was depressed for like 2 years after that breakup. And a lot of people give you about 3 weeks till they think you should start, like, even people who have been through this stuff, they can be quite callous about it, because they're just like, come on, I don't want you to feel this way anymore, / I don't want to be around you like this anymore. So just hurry up and get better. And then we start faking it, which leads to like repression of feelings and not processing them. And then they come out in addictive behaviors, etc. But it should be hopeful, because I would say at 5 years onward, I barely remembered it. At 10 years, it's like a whiff that I cannot even think of. And now I almost sometimes think of it like nostalgically as a huge formative moment of my life. And I think that is hopeful, because when you're in that, it feels completely inescapable. Okay. And so, you cannot think your way out of it. That's the first premise. All right. And in a lot of ways, the more you think about it, very often, in my experience, the more you think about it, the more caught you get in that web. It's almost like, being in a spider web, right? The more that you struggle, the more you get tangled up in the web. Or I don't even know if this is true about quicksand, but you're supposed to just sort of lie flat, I guess. I don't even know. I don't know what the latest quicksand data is. Sometimes perseverating on something, continually thinking about it, actually makes the somatic experience of it worse and worse and worse. It's kind of like that context-dependent memory that people, like when you can't think of something. Oh, Lord, here's a fly. You can't think of something, and then you sit there and you try to remember it. You can't think of it. And then finally you go take a shower or do something else, and it pops in your head. I think in a lot of ways, so much of the work the actual like construction project on the depression in your head happens when you are not at the construction site. And so it became part of my toolkit over time to figure out ways that I could be somewhere between present and not present. And solo RPGs do a great job of that, because you have to be present enough to deal with these sort of calculations and the inputs and interpretations, but you don't have to be so there that, you're like, I don't know, base jumping, or engaged in even like reading a book. Just reading, sometimes it just like gives an opportunity for your mind to drift. There's just enough activeness and enough passiveness that you can be engaged with it without being like totally consumed by it. Because as you know, if you've dealt with depression or anxiety, it's extremely hard to concentrate on anything. And so a lot of recommendations people give, they're just nonsense, because it's like, I'll never be able to sit there and do that. All I'll do is my mind will keep drifting. Okay. And so I think that, I'm just going to keep building this little pyramid here. Our metacognition is going to be broken. We can't think ourselves out of it. We need activities that we can immerse ourselves in enough to distract ourselves and escape a little bit, but not so much that we have taken flight. I think video games goes over that line of a flight into fantasy. There's very few people that recover from a depressive state by playing video games. There could be some, right? I don't know. Maybe someone watching this is like, no, I got out of depression by playing Warcraft. I would say for the majority of people, it does not work. It's a very passive experience, especially now. Video games do not usually, unless you're playing like Dark Souls, they don't involve the gradual building of a skill or the gradual improvement of your capability and coordination. They just sort of like are this gradually unfolding story followed by like mindlessness of following things around and looking for things. And so for me, tabletop role playing is something that is right in that sweet spot. Okay. And on top of that, one of the most profound things that happens, especially after a breakup, but in any depression, is that you, especially early in your life, you lose your relationship with yourself. Now, this is very easy when you're young, because when you're young, you don't really even have a relationship with yourself yet. And when you get in a first relationship, at least for me, that was like my whole life. Like I finally thought that everything was figured out. Like I thought that everything was now good and that I finally was happy. And I feel so bad for that little guy just thinking about me back then, because I didn't know any better. I learned all this stuff through books and movies, and the view of it there was so ridiculous. But I remember when I got broken up with, and it was really, really in quite a cruel way. I remember being so confused, because I was like, but I didn't do anything. I had honestly thought, like, think about how ignorant this is. I honestly thought that it was like against the rules to break up with someone unless they like were mean to you or abuse you or cheated on you. And so I was so confused. I was like, I didn't get any penalties. Why am I being broken up with? And, it's like the penalty of incompatibility or the penalty of just not like feeling that feeling anymore were not penalties I knew of at that time. And so I sort of, I was just completely derailed. I didn't know what to do with myself. I was pathetic. I'm not saying that in a mocking tone. I was like a pathetic creature. And I was so devastated and I was so depressed, because I was already devastated and depressed before that. And so when that happened, it refractured all those wounds that I thought were patched up by another person. I noticed about 3 months onward after that I went shopping and I unloaded everything into the refrigerator. And I looked and I was like, so much of this stuff is stuff that I don't like. I just got it because she liked it. And it was that was like the first notion that I had that I had totally lost myself in that relationship, and that my ability to draw boundaries between me and other people was something that I needed to do some work on. And it was a long time until I was able to do that work, but that was the first notion of it. And the work is finding ways to know yourself and trust yourself. Okay. Universally, especially young men today, I think have a real problem with this because we don't have any rites of passage. Um, you know, people who are female have a sort of built-in rite of passage that happens in their early adolescence, and like men now we don't have rites of passage anymore. We don't have like climbing a pole or going on the big hunt or, doing some test that allows the community to witness men as having graduated into a higher state of responsibility into adulthood. So young men are left to guess when they're adults. They're really bad at guessing, and their rites of passage that they make up for themselves are terrible, which usually involve like having sex, usually unprotected, getting in fights, telling off authority, sometimes doing crime or getting money in any way that you can. And then when you see those rites of passage and the men that they produce, this replicates itself. Okay. And so there are lots of men, especially women too, but men who have no idea who they are, and they suddenly are broken up with, and their world is completely shattered. And the reason is because they don't have a relationship with themselves. Because unfortunately, those young rudderless boys turn into technically men, but they never do. They're in like what would be called puer aeterna, eternal adolescence. They never grow up. And then they serve as the, we might say, the role models for other kids, and it perpetuates itself. There's just not enough, role models for people today. And I think that is something that a old codger would say. Not enough role models, but it's true. And with a role model shows you how to take care of yourself, how to know yourself, how to depend on yourself. And when you experience depression, there is a huge, as C.S. Lewis would say, a great divorce between yourself and your body. Especially today, there are so many artificial things, whether that's food or ideas or experiences. There's so much artificiality that we have fractured our relationship to our internal sensors. We don't know what we want. We don't know what we like. We don't know what we're like. We don't know who we are. Okay. I think that solo roleplay provides an avenue to explore that, not in a deep clinical way, perhaps, but it provides a way to forget that you're investigating yourself. Because once again, when you try too hard to know yourself or sort of research yourself, you cannot actually objectively research yourself without changing yourself as you research. And the only way to do it is, as Milan Kundera might say, is laughter and forgetting, right? It's like you have to forget that you're looking inside yourself. Solo play is a great way to do this, right? Because you're engaged enough in a game, and naturally, because you're entering a creative mode, things are coming up in you and bubbling out, and characters are having opinions, and fate is turning in certain directions, and you're getting upset at things that you're surprised you're upset with them. And all of those things are bubbling up from your subconscious, giving you messages that you might not realize when they're happening, because you forgot that you're just deriving these things from yourself. Because the more you immerse yourself into this world and your friends, the more that you are able to get that degree of separation possible to investigate yourself more objectively. All right. You cannot think yourself out of depression. You have to ride yourself out of depression. There are three things that I can definitively say helped me the most with depression. Number one, lifting weights and riding a bicycle. It is definitely easier to ride a bike out of depression than it is to think yourself out of depression. If you have never read Steel by Henry Rollins, it's a short essay about weightlifting. I recommend you read that. The Iron, maybe I think it's called. Henry Rollins. Yes, that Henry Rollins. So that sort of activity, using my body, moving my body. Number two was opening my blinds in the morning and letting sunlight on me and going outside. And number three was creating things. And also lowering the threshold for what I considered a valid creation. Because prior to starting to get into sort of these more creative endeavors, I thought that being creative meant you had to have something that you published or that people gave you positive feedback about or was featured somewhere. And then if you're anything like me, your 20s and early 30s probably too, were this horror of discovering that like everything in the world is just fake, like it's just made up. And I'm not trying to be nihilist with that, but like the Academy Awards. Like the Academy Awards is just a group of people who just are congratulating themselves. But for whatever reason, when I was young, I was like, oh, that's a very prestigious award. Or like Harvard or Yale. Those are just schools that people decide are good. And there's a lot of money and everything involved, but that's nothing more than an abstraction of relative value. And so, you know, as you confront that black pill of the fact that the world is just this sort of like matrix of connections, it's very scary, but then it's very liberating once you find out, oh, well, I don't need any of these external things to approve of me. And then furthermore, the more you start producing things, creating things, having experiences for yourself, the more you realize that your lizard brain has no idea how to measure achievement. And it feels equally good about yourself. And I've said this before, it feels equally good about yourself like when you make a sculpture and when you cook a good meal and when you have a really good play session of 12 years, once again by Max Moon Games, if this looks interesting to you, you have no, your lizard brain cannot distinguish between those things. It's just like your hands made stuff thing, right? And furthermore, by creating these things that have an audience of you, just you, that is what reestablishes that trust and that sensor with yourself, where you once again begin to have the ability to say, I like this, I enjoy this, I don't enjoy this, right? Because I would say one of the leading causes of depression is people pursuing other people's happiness instead of their own. And unfortunately, in the social economic milieu that we live in now, there's nothing but people trying to influence you into their conception of happiness, or even worse, into their fake conception of happiness. This like thing that they're either trying to convince you is happiness, or they're trying to convince themselves it's happiness. I mean, how many nasty, rude, cruel people are there out there trying to convince people that being confrontational, putting people down, being arrogant, being dismissive of other people's feelings is a pathway to happiness. There's no way that stuff like that is ever going to make somebody happy. And yet we have so much media now trying to tell people that that's what you need to strive towards being petty and being undermining and being spiteful and being, boundaried to the point of being sociopathic, right? And what really makes people happy is the thing that sets off their happy meter. And usually, thank God, What usually sets off people's happy meter is when they mold something out of clay, right? That's whatever that clay is. When I finish playing a session of solo role playing, I have something. I have created something, even if it's a list of bullet points. I've had an experience that is uniquely mine. It's nobody else's. And yeah, I could share it on here. I do that half the time. Before I made this channel, I did it 0% of the time. It was just for me. That made me proud of myself. That makes me so proud of myself. I'm so pleased with myself. I'm so impressed with myself. I just love hanging out with myself. If you have a very ironic orientation towards the world, what I just said is embarrassing. But you know what? I'm embarrassed for people who go around and look for other people being miserable. That's embarrassing to me. Trying to prove that everything is miserable. I did it for a decade of my life. Every time I saw somebody who was pretending to be happy, I said, oh, just wait. And then suddenly they were unhappy, or they got in trouble for something, or they got some sort of comeuppance. And I said, aha, you see, faker. They're not really happy. But you know what? I certainly wasn't. So what was the point of that? What good does that do me? Right? That is the coin of the realm, unfortunately, right now, is like finding the bad and cringe-worthy people. And if it's cringe to say I really love hanging around with myself and I really appreciate my talents and my personality, if that's cringe, I don't want to be Crite. You know, if that's cringe, then I don't give a shit. Like, who cares? Why would I care if something that makes me happy and hurts nobody is embarrassing? My God, can you imagine caring? It's like sitting down and eating pasta and someone being like, oh, I can't believe you're eating pasta. And you're like, well, I don't really care what you think because I'm eating pasta, which is delicious. So who the hell cares what you think about it, right? Solo play is so fascinating because it is, and I don't want to overstate it, but it is this radically weird act of self-entertainment. Someone wrote a comment the other day that was just like, it was really great. And I wish I could remember who it was. If you're watching this, please comment. But they were like, yeah, I kept trying to get my family to play board games. They wouldn't play them. I kept asking, they wouldn't play them. And finally I said, screw it. And I sat down and I played the board game by myself and it was great. And now they want to start with solo role-playing games. And I was like, that's fantastic. Because that is exactly what I'm talking about, is solo play represents solo play. It is what it is. But it's also being able to say, I'm not going to keep waiting for other people to tell me or allow me to have a good time. I'm going to go ahead and do that myself. And the more you do that, the more stable your relationship becomes with yourself. It also satisfies doing something. If you have experienced a breakup, if you've experienced any sort of really difficult situation, and this depends on your disposition, you know, your extra, intra, perversion, whatever you are, that you may want quiet and silence, but very often in sorrow, we may not want to hang around with people all the time, but if we just sit there with our thoughts, that's like doom, right? And so we need to do something that is engaging enough to bring us somewhere, that is transportative enough to distract us, that is grounded enough to not like escape into it. These just like check off so many boxes for me for solo role playing. You need to do something. You need to learn something. You need to learn something because you are in the process of learning one of the most important lessons in life, which is that it's you, man. It's you. It's on you. And maybe not everyone's like me. Maybe you were never under the delusion that happiness was found in other people. I unfortunately was. Um, I thought it was. And I thought that being happy meant you had to sort of like upgrade to be with the best possible person. And that was a reflection on you. And if they were with you, that validated you. And when that went away the first time, it was shocking. And it was so scary because I was like, I'm all alone. Nobody's going to help me. Nobody's going to save me. Nobody's going to take care of me. And then I woke up the next day. Is anyone going to save me? Is anyone going to help me? Take care of me? Can I talk to the manager? Is there a manager? Oh my God, I'm the manager of my life, right? I'm my own Karen. Whatever the hell. And I woke up day after day after day asking that question until finally I started waking up and I didn't ask the question anymore. I just said, yeah, it's on me. That's who it's always been on, right? You need to do things to develop that relationship with yourself. And part of that is creating something. Part of that's just hobbies, engaging in things that are life-giving and productive. And it's also about learning stuff. And so, Geek Gamers, the GOAT, would say all of this is, every part of play, preparing, researching, drawing up your character sheet, it's all play. And I think that's so important because all of that stuff is you creating and learning. And even better if you can engage in a role-playing game that involves learning something, learning a talent, learning something about history, learning what you like in fiction, whatever that might be. These are the ways out. Okay. I wanted to, if you'll indulge me, which by this point you've indulged me a lot, I wanted to read two poems that were really important to me, about this sort of. The first one was for my own breakup and bout of depression, but this is from a book called Iron Man Family Outing, and it's kind of, I think, a self-published book by a guy named Rick Belden, who, when I read this in like 2006, I sent an email to Rick and I said, hey, I just want you to know that I read your book last night and I think you might have saved my life. And I was like serious. And interestingly, Rick's blog, which I looked for this blog before the video, and apparently in 2008, unfortunately, his blog got all deleted. All of it went away. Like the server failed or something. So I wasn't able to find that. But because the next day he posted and he was like, I was about to quit this. I was about to stop writing poems. And then I got this email from this random person yesterday. And the poem is called Fused at the Wound. And I'd like to read it. Again, it's by Rick Belden, Iron Man Family Outing. I unfortunately don't know where to get it now, but it's very good. Is it love or is it addiction? Why not both? She knows tears and I know anger. Together, we almost made a whole person for a while, fused at the wound. But our little house of lies isn't big enough to hold us now. She won't stand up for herself, and I can't stand up for both of us at the same time anymore. So we ride the broken lover's seesaw of staying and leaving, 1 foot in and 1 foot out. We dance in the kitchen like unloved children, wait for fulfillment of old pain's expectations, so anxious to leave, so anxious to be left, so anxious to be right, so anxious to be hurt, so anxious to be disappointed, so anxious to be alone again. When this whole thing started, I wanted us to be immersed in each other. I wanted us to fix each other. I thought that was what people were supposed to do. I don't want that anymore. I don't need that anymore. But I still don't know how to love someone I don't want to fix. That line is underlined. This little graphite here must be 20 years old. When I first read this poem, this resonated so much with me because I was like, yeah, every person I fall in love with is this person that I want to do, like, I want to rescue them, or I want to save them, or I want to change them. Everything's great about them except this one thing, and I'll change it. And I never knew what to do with that. And that gets said a lot. That's very common dating advice. You got to stop trying to date people who you want to change or who you want to save. And like, I think we all know that's good advice, but I never really knew why that's good advice until it hit me one day that this line, at least the inverse of it, is not really about other people. When I say I still don't know how to love someone I don't want to fix, there's an inverse version of that line, right? And that line is, I always love people who I want to fix, or I cannot love somebody who needs fixing. And I realize it's about myself and how profoundly broken I felt, and how profoundly incomplete and inadequate and unworthy I felt. And because I was someone who needed fixing, because I was someone who was broken, I didn't know how to love myself. Now, I don't believe that you need to fix everything to find romantic love. You might not even want that. Or you might want it to stop. You might be in a situation where you're like, I am with the person and it's not right. You might be in any kind of situation. It really doesn't matter. I don't necessarily believe that we have to like be fully fixed, but I do feel like we have to be engaged in the work. And there's people telling us that all the time. There's so much advice about healing, but there's just not a good amount of advice on what that looks like. And so what I recommend is engaging in activities, again, that allow you to listen to yourself without knowing that you're listening to yourself. And I do feel like that is perfectly what solo gaming does, which especially if it has a journaling component, or if it has NPC generation component, if it allows you to generate scenarios that are seemingly out of nowhere, and you have a record of that, and you can go back to it later and realize that your subconscious mind is always journaling. It's always journaling. There's a reason why that NPC acted that way. And you don't have to like read tea leaves to figure that out. Your subconscious mind desperately wants to verbalize these things to you, but it doesn't have the same language. It speaks in symbols and archaic rhymes and incantations, right? And so we have to find languages that we can speak through. And I think that solo gaming is but one way to do that. I don't think it's the be all end all. Dang, this is so cool. Look at this. I got this like quick reference table. This is so nicely laid out. Now this is kind of like a 4AD game, so this wouldn't be exactly what I'm talking about, although I think it would work pretty well because you have like notes and stuff. And so if you create some things with your player, I think that could be really cool. Playing the base game, I think, is pretty generative, but again, you do have multiple people, and I think that if you add some texture to this, the same difference. And then here's like this, like I said, these hexploring tables. You need to escape, but with a tether, or like leave breadcrumbs for yourself, because what you don't want to do is just escape. I mean, sometimes you do, right? Like, especially early on, you just need to like keep yourself safe and keep yourself sane. But over time, you want to be fearful about things that are really easy. Something I love about solo role-playing is it makes no sense for me to do it because there are so many easier ways to like play a game. I mean, the ability to set up a game and to play a solo game, just like the planning of it, the execution, the learning of it, all of that could be done in 0.06 seconds by downloading, Skald the Black Priory from Steam, which is an awesome game. But instead, I go through this laborious process of generating my own world and then traveling through it. And my friends, that is what we're all doing. That's what this whole thing is us generating this life for ourselves and then walking through it. And what I think is so special about solo games is it allows us an opportunity to rehearse that and to see how that feels and to know what we like and engender a better knowledge of what we like and what we don't like, and not have anyone around that can do a ruling on that but us. We talk about a lot, and you see this on other solo play channels, this idea of like, they'll say, roll 2d6, and if it's higher than the difficulty rating, then the thing succeeds. But if it's lower, then it fails. But also, if you really think it's just a good idea to do it, just go with your gut. I know that a lot of you have trouble with that because you don't want to cheat. You want to play the game right, and you don't want to change it to suit your needs. Trusting yourself is knowing like when your idea is good, and you don't feel bad about changing a dice roll or anything like that. Because it's not cheating, it's creating a story. Because it's not cheating because you're the engine behind everything. You're the engine behind everything. I'm sorry. One more poem. This is another one that I think is 2014 from Catherine Maris. This was from Poetry Foundation. I think what is described in this poem is called Singles Cruise is even more dire now. It was a singles cruise, but it wasn't a singles cruise. Each participant simulated detachment, but none was actually single. Some, like the recently widowed, were attached to ghosts. Others were legally attached to a living person they once but no longer loved. A surprising number loved their partners profoundly, while fearing said partners inhabited the category of those who loved them no longer. These participants, whose fear may or may not have been founded, attempted to self-protect by labeling themselves single. Soon a pattern emerged. Those who feared abandonment developed around them a planetary-like orbit of potential new partners to whom they could not attach because they were already attached. Such orbits lasted sometimes for years. The orbiters went to self-help groups and/or analysts and/or wrote letters to advice columnists. Because they could not detach from their objects of unrequited affection, they became the predominant clientele for future singles cruises, unilaterally sustaining the single cruise business. This is a lonely world, unfortunately. But the best and only company that you can always rely on is yourself. And if you can do solo tabletop RPGs or anything that helps you to cultivate that better relationship with yourself, that's a guaranteed winning idea to do that, because you're the one who's going to keep yourself company. And for me, solo role-playing is the best way to keep yourself company. Just my opinion, just a thought. If you like this thought, feel free to join buymeacoffee.com/Man Alone, where I release my weekly Man Alone members only podcast. Thank you to the 70 members that are already there. It's only $4 a month. The top news sources recently stated that $4 is pretty much zero. I think that was the headline. It's like, man spends $4 and doesn't even notice. It was an incredible story. You probably can't find it because we're in a time loop. Okay, I've overstayed my welcome. I can't believe I read 2 poems on here today. I mean, how ignorant. Who do I think I am? It's a role-playing channel, and I'm making people sit through poems. At least I didn't do the Zen koans. I mean, I kind of wanted to. There's a couple Zen koans that are really good. Oh my god, I'm still recording.